welcome to my channel where we talk about the weird, wild, and somewhat worrisome. Today we're going to talk about the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed and Lorraine were two very prominent paranormal investigators and authors associated with very prominent cases of hauntings and possession. Edward Warren Minty was born September 7th, 1926, passing away in August 23rd of 2006. He was a self-taught and self-professed demonologist, author, and lecturer. Lorraine Rita Moran was born in Bridgeport on January 31st, 1927, passing away only last year on April 18th. She began having clairvoyant experiences as a child. As well, she's a professed light trance medium. Ed and Lorraine met when Lorraine was just 16. Some friends had taken her to see a James Cagney movie where Ed worked as a theater usher. They were together for a while when Ed was called up to fight in World War II. And in 1945, while on leave, Ed and Lorraine married. Edward took classes after the war and began selling his paintings on roadsides. His belief in paranormal stemmed from growing up in a haunted house and began to merge his interest of the paranormal into his painting. When the couple would hear of a house that was haunted, they would offer to paint this home and then give the painting to the homeowner. Often they would end up getting a tour. The Warrens were devout Roman Catholics. They say that their religion kept them from being haunted. So if you ever wonder why they weren't possessed, they believe it's because of their religion and their strong religious practice. In 1952, the Warrens founded the New England Society for Psychic Research, the oldest ghost hunting group in New England. They authored many books on the paranormal and about their private investigation, claiming to have investigated over 10,000 cases during their career. Stories of hauntings popularized by the Warrens have been adapted into dozens of films, television shows, series, and documentaries, including 17 films on the Amityville Horror and 7 films in the Conjuring universe. Kind of like the Marvel universe, but for spookiness. There are many skeptics who have investigated the Warrens' evidence, and some described it as quote-unquote blarney or invented. The interesting part is the Warrens didn't actually charge for their investigation. They made their money from movie licensing rights, books, lectures, and tours of their modest little museum of supernatural artifacts. So let's go over some of their most notable investigations. The Amityville Horror House. Now, a lot of you know from TikTok that I'm a little bit skeptical on this one, but here we go. The Warrens were some of the first investigators into the Amityville Horror House. 23 years old at the time, Ron DeFeo murdered his entire family while they were asleep, which included his parents and 4 siblings. After the family had passed, the house was sold to the Lutz family in 1974, and they began to report very mysterious incidences and disturbing sensations. Stepfather George had a history of dabbling in the occult. Lutz said he would wake up at 3:15 every single morning, which was around the same time, allegedly, that Ron had committed the murders. The Lutz family reported that they would smell strange odors and see green ooze coming out of keyholes and out of the walls, and they would experience cold spots in certain areas of the house. When a priest came to investigate the home, allegedly he heard something scream, "Get out!" He told the Lutzes never to sleep in a particular room. I wonder which room it was. Other paranormal activity has been reported, such as the garage door opening and closing on its own. A spirit allegedly knocked a knife down in the kitchen. A pig-like creature with red glowing eyes was seen by one of the young girls. George Lutz allegedly saw his wife Kathy levitating from their bed, and also Daniel and Christopher, their young sons, were seen levitating in their beds. Many questioned the Lutz story, as I do. After telling their story, George and his wife Kathy both took lie detector tests, proving their innocence. They passed. The couple was bogged down by legal and financial issues, which prompted a lot of skeptics to believe that they were not necessarily telling the truth. The Lutz family lawyer, William Weber, alleged that this story was concocted over many bottles of wine. It was entirely made up. Their son Daniel, who now lives a really quiet life in Queens, New York, as a stonemason, claims to this day that the house ruined his life, and he continues to have nightmares to this day, which I hope is not true because that's really sad. Murderer Ron DeFeo, who killed his entire family, is serving 6 25 life sentences in a New York correctional facility. He still claims that he heard voices urging him to kill his family. The Warrens believed that the suffering there had been left on the property and that a negative energy persisted, and that such a negative history was a magnet for more demonic energy. This case raised their profile as paranormal investigators, but it also unsettled them, according to Lorraine. She said the case itself affected our personal lives more than any other case we've ever worked on in our 54 years of research. She said, and that's a lot of places. This story has been adapted into a lot of frightening movies, and this Dutch colonial home built in 1975 has new owners who claim that they don't have any new issues. The Lutz family only lived there for 28 days, and it's interesting that the stories that they share are so polarizing. Ed and Lorraine were called in to cleanse the home, and they brought a local TV crew with them. One alleged story is that Ed snapped a photo of a young boy with glowing eyes. Ed determined that the land had curses on it, and Lorraine claimed to the day she died that this was the most terrifying home that she'd ever visited. The house officially sold in February of 2017 for $605,000 and now has a new address to keep people from visiting. Many know the story of Annabelle the doll, but according to the Warrens, in 1968 was possessed by the spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins. Two roommates claimed that a Raggedy Ann doll. The Warrens took the doll, saying that it was being manipulated by an inhuman presence. This is the first time that an investigation took the Warrens to a thing rather than a place. It's now on display in their occult museum. More specifically, this Raggedy Ann doll was just purchased in an antique market, given to the buyer's daughter, a nursing student, who quickly began to notice odd occurrences, such as the doll being in random places at random times, supposedly moving on its own and changing its own position. Things escalated when the doll started to leave notes behind, and there was blood appearing on the doll's dress. At one point, Annabelle attacked its current owner. Annabelle took particular aim to the fiancé of the roommate, who claims he was woken up, frozen, and the doll was crawling up his body, and it strangled him. He also alleged that upon entering a darkened room, the doll attacked him. When he flipped the switch, he looked down and noticed that his stomach was bleeding, and the doll was on the floor. They called in a medium who explained that she believed the doll was possessed by the spirit of a deceased 7-year-old girl, Annabelle Higgins, who had supposedly died in the apartment on the floor where they very well stood. The Warren family got involved and performed a blessing on the doll before taking it from the young woman's hands. It's now a prominent figure in the Warren Occult Museum. The Perron family. When Roger and Carolyn Perron moved their 5 young daughters to a new 200-acre home in Harrisville, Rhode Island, they were unaware of the former insidious resident and her 4 children, 3 of whom passed away very young. Despite a high mortality rate at the time for infants, even these deaths seemed a little odd for those surrounding this area. The home was once inhabited by Bathsheba Thayer. The deaths of her children and the circumstances surrounding them roused a lot of suspicion, which resulted in the ostracism of Thayer. She was labeled a Satanist by her community, and it's alleged that she hung herself in a tree in the backyard, which you actually see in the movie The Conjuring. While the Perron family lived in this home, there were numerous pleasant ghostly interactions, such as the ghost playing with their children or helping to do chores, lucky. But there were darker interactions. Thayer took on a more menacing presence in the home. They heard disembodied voices, furniture moving around the home, and Carolyn was more so the center of attention for the spirit. They were thinking that perhaps Bathsheba felt really jealous of Carolyn taking over her home and focused most of her malevolent energy on her. Carolyn was bitten and slapped, whereas Roger was treated a little bit better. Awkward. The Warrens were brought in 1974, but their presence aggravated things. So much so that the family actually asked the Warrens to leave. The parents eventually moved, and this inspired the movie The Conjuring. The Enfield Poltergeist. In 1977, the Warrens investigated claims of a family in North London, a small suburb called Enfield, that they were haunted by poltergeist activity. Many called this a hoax by attention-hungry young children, but the Warrens were convinced that there was demonic possession in this home and came to investigate. You'll notice the storyline of this is in The Conjuring 2. The story mostly involves 2 children, Margaret, aged 13, and Janet, aged 11. Police actually investigated and said that they saw a chair wobbling on its own. but they couldn't determine the cause of the movement. Later claims would say that the family could hear disembodied voices, thrown toys, overturned chairs, and the children levitating, which is actually caught in a picture. For 18 months, more than 30 people, including neighbors and police officers, as well as psychic researchers and journalists, entered this home to see what was happening. Many saw heavy furniture being moved and other objects moving of their own accord. A few saw the daughters levitating several feet in the air. Things came to a head when young Janet was possessed. Janet would often bend metal spoons and, speaking in a growling voice, even attempted to bend an iron bar.
How many voices are there?
600.
600 the voices.
I know the joke.
How many really are there, Margaret?
I think so far we've had 10
Three.
sensible voices, but the rest of the names are absolute rubbish.
That same chair where the police saw wobble, Janet actually referred to when she was speaking in one of her voices. She said, "Just before I died, I went blind. Then I had an hemorrhage, and I fell asleep, and I died in that chair just in the corner downstairs." That eerie voice can still be heard on audio tapes today. The new owner did stipulate that they did feel a presence in the home, that they felt like they were never alone. Understandable. And she was heavily bullied in school. The case of Arnie Cheyenne Johnson. This one is a little bit strange for me. It drew considerable publicity for the Warrens in 1981, but the family continued to live in that home until Peggy, the mother's death. It was their involvement in a murder case in Connecticut, in which the defendant, Arnie Johnson, sought to argue that the devil made him do it. The judge didn't believe him, obviously, and he was convicted of manslaughter, but here's the story. In 1981, 19-year-old Arnie Cheyenne Johnson was accused of stabbing and killing his landlord, Alan Bono, with a pocket knife. Ed and Lorraine had been called in prior to the murder to deal with an alleged demonic presence of the younger brother of Johnson's fiancée. In 1980, David, the fiancé, said that he woke up with a man with black eyes, a thin face with animal features, jagged teeth, horns, and hooves in his room. Basically the creature that you see in the movie Insidious. David and his fiancée Debbie turned to Arnie for help, desperate. Johnson couldn't find a reasonable explanation for David's sudden bruises and scratches all over his body, so the family pivoted to a priest. But that only angered the entity more, causing it to make David hiss, speak in multiple voices, and quote Paradise Lost. When the Warrens came to investigate, Lorraine stated that she saw a black misty mass close to David, which told them that they were dealing with something very negative. And there were red marks all over him, like the feeling that he'd been bit. The Warrens worked very closely with the Diocese of Bridgeport, and 4 priests were brought in to exorcise more than 40 demons from David. And David returned to normal after this exorcism. Arnie, however, became the new target. He moved in with Debbie and David, and after going out to the bar, got in a fight with Bono, where Johnson stabbed Bono. The Warrens were called in to testify and subsequently said that they thought Johnson was also possessed. At trial, Johnson attempted to plead not guilty by reason of demonic possession. He actually was the first person in a US court case to use the defense, "The devil made me do it," which is really strange because that's also what the Amityville Horror Ronald DeFeo killer used. Johnson's defense did not hold up in court. He was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter and served 5 years. The Snedeker House. In 1986, Ed and Lorraine arrived and proclaimed the Snedeker House, a former funeral home, to be infested with demons. The case was featured in a book in 1992 called In a Dark Place, The Story of a True Haunting. In a TV show in 2002, A Haunting was also made based on this story. A Haunting in Connecticut was also created but very loosely based on this story, released in 2009. Carmen and Al Snedeker rented a home in Southington, Connecticut, to be closer to the hospital where their son was undergoing treatment, but unfortunately they had very little information on the former resident's gruesome and strange past. The former funeral home was complete with a mortuary in the basement and a graveyard in the backyard. Upon moving in, the eldest son would see terrifying visions of ghosts. The family would regularly find toe tags in the home, along with lights flickering, doors slamming, dishes shaking, the smell of decaying flesh, and the water reportedly on occasion turning red. Strangely, Al and Carmen also said that the demons sodomized them for 2 years. They asked the Warrens for help, and the Warrens attributed the ghosts in the home to those who were brought to the funeral home to be processed. But according to the Warrens, the mortuary staff partook in some unsavory activities with the dead. After 2 years, the Snedekers moved out. Afterwards, the story was immortalized in movies. There are some parts of the story that are questioned due to the alcohol and drug abuse known inside of this family. Allegedly, they couldn't keep their story straight, and it was quite frustrating, according to paranormal investigator Benjamin Radford. He also said very scathingly that if Lorraine told you the sun was going to come up, it wasn't going to. The Smurl family. Pennsylvania residents Jack and Janet Smurl reported that their home was disturbed by multiple phenomena of a supernatural nature, including smells and apparitions. The Warrens became involved and claimed that the Smurl residence was infested by 4 spirits, also that a demon was allegedly sexually assaulting the family. This took place in 1986. According to Ed, the demon that inhabited this home was, quote, very powerful. It shook mirrors and furniture, and they tried to persuade it to leave by playing religious music and praying. Warren claimed that he felt a large drop in temperature and that he saw a large dark mass form inside of the home. The demon left a message on the mirror. It was simple: get out. After months of investigation, Ed claimed to have multiple audio tapes of the demon knocking and rapping around. There was quite a bit of pushback on this case. Professor Paul Kurtz, State of New York University, chairman for the scientific investigation of claims of the paranormal, what a mouthful, said that the Warrens were not objective, independent, or impartial investigators, and characterized the Smurl story as a hoax, a raid, a ghost story. Kurtz pointed out that Jack Smurl had meningitis as a child and underwent brain surgery to remove water from behind the brain, and that perhaps that caused a lot of his delusional thoughts and hallucinations. It still doesn't explain how things moved around the home. Allentown psychologist Robert Gordon commented that people often look at demonology as a way to explain many tensions that you feel as an individual as well as within your family. Spokespeople for the Roman Catholic Church, the Diocese of Scranton, said that they were unsure what might have caused the disturbances, and that the home had been blessed by several priests who saw no significant activity in the home. They even stayed for 2 days. Janet claimed that 3 identified priests performed exorcisms unsuccessfully on her, and that the demon evaded the rites by moving between home. A year later, things returned back to normal after some intense family therapy, as well as guidance from the church for the Smurl family. This story also became a movie and a book. Union Cemetery. Ed Warren's book, Graveyard, True Haunting from an Old New England Cemetery, features a white lady ghost. Now, if you watch my TikToks, you'll know that I am kind of skeptical when somewhere says that it has a white lady ghost, because everywhere has a white lady ghost apparently. However, she's described as wearing a white gown, having long black hair, and apparently is a bit of a prankster. The spirit of a woman who was either hit by a car or murdered in the 1940s. Story changes. Or a woman who was killed and her body was dumped in a sinkhole behind the church. Or a woman that had murdered her husband and then took her own life. The stories go on, and there's nothing definitive to prove that there is a white lady. But anyways, I digress. Her identity remains a mystery. Ed says that he captured her essence on film while visiting the Union. The Werewolf of South End. This is perhaps one of the most unusual stories to come out of all of the Ed and Lorraine stories. It takes them out of the US into the seaside town of Essex, England. The only way is Essex. Bill Ramsey was believed to have been possessed by a demon that manifested itself early in his life as a wolf. The once normal, happy boy, at 9 years old, began exhibiting inhuman quality. Reportedly, while playing outside one day, he ripped out a cement fence post when he was overcome by an awful stench, and he flew into a rage, gnawing on its wire meshing. He grew up and became a loving father and husband, and he didn't experience anything else until the 1960s. The early years of his marriage were plagued by nightmares, cold sweats, and waking up to the panting of a wild animal, which he soon realized was coming from him. In the 1980s, Bill was overcome as he had as a child when he was hanging out with some of his friends, and even once while doing a citizen's arrest. At one point, he attacked a car while with friends, and when police intervened, he manhandled them in a wild altercation. And this continued to happen on several occasions. In the midst of all this, Ramsey had several stints in the hospital, all featuring symptoms of rage, like inhuman strength, baring his teeth, growling, haunch shoulders, and his hands like claws. There's actually a picture. July of 1987, Bill locked up a local prostitute and demanded that the South End police lock him up for the public's safety. Now, Bill had no criminal history according to the police at this point, so they were really reluctant to arrest him, but Bill flew into a fit of rage, growling and scratching like a wild animal. Sergeant Terry Fisher decided that they would lock him up. It took 6 men to restrain Bill and sedate him, and they had to use double the dose to sedate him. He threw officers around like matchsticks. Reportedly, one was over 6 feet tall and 200 pounds, and he threw him like it was nothing. They heard a loud bang coming from the cell block, and when they went to investigate, Bill had slammed his body through a door. Impossibly. This time they had to use nearly 3 times the dose to sedate him. The Warrens brought him to their Connecticut home, which I would have never thought to do, where Bishop Robert McKenna came in and did a wild exorcism on Bill. As the exorcism commenced, Bill turned into a werewolf. Or, when it was finished, Bill was exhausted and sweaty, and allegedly to this day has not experienced a symptom. Whether actually lycanthropy or a classic case of genuine demonic possession, these events have left many perplexed and disturbed. Many give this the credibility of a modern-day werewolf with the Warren stamp of approval on it. Many skeptics have investigated the Warrens' evidence and come up with not a whole lot. It's hard to say that specifically a house is haunted or come up with evidence of such, but the fact that they sold their movie rights and made so much money on that causes a lot of people to be skeptical, especially when it comes to the Amityville Horror House. Many say that the Amityville and Snedeker home were not only false or hoaxes, but just invented. For me, Ed and Lorraine were really good storytellers, and perhaps they really did study demonology. I mean, Lorraine talking about being a clairvoyant, I could definitely see that that's a thing. However, there's a lot of darkness associated with their story that I just didn't feel comfortable bringing up, but I definitely would love to know your thoughts. Do you believe that all these stories are true? Do you believe that the Warrens were trying to make money? Or were Ed and Lorraine out there just to make the world a better place, and by not charging these families for the investigations, we're really helping them? Put your comments in the section down below. This was the winner of our TikTok vote. Also, if you're into more spooky content, make sure to like and follow. We make new videos every Wednesday. Thanks for stopping by. So spooky.